Syntax. In this video, I'm just going to be introducing some of the really basic concepts of syntax. But before we get started, I want to talk about communication itself. So the idea is that the sender, whether that's a speaker or a writer or a signer, that they have a thought and they want to encode that thought into a linguistic form that they're going to produce. And then the receiver decodes that form to determine what the thought that the sender was sending. So, for example, this man wants to tell a story about his granddaughter and how she cut her own hair. And so he says, she cut her own hair. But in order to do that, in order to transfer that thought from one person to another, there's a lot of steps involved. The speaker, first of all, has the thought, and then selects the words and morphemes that they want to encode that thought with. They follow syntactic rules to combine the words and morphemes into a sentence. They follow morphological rules to combine the morphemes. They follow phonological rules to select the pronunciation. They send commands to their motor cortex, and ultimately they produce the sounds physically. The hearer, on the other side, receives the sounds through their ears. They follow phonological rules to determine what the phonemic form is. They follow morphological rules to determine the morphemes. They follow syntactic rules to identify the sentence. And then ultimately, they identify the thought. We've talked about this before, that language is a sign system, and morphemes/words are signs. They're arbitrary pairings of form and function. So you've got the form bunny, and then the meaning or function is that concept, that furry animal that hops, whatever it is that in your brain that you have for a meaning for bunny. A sentence also pairs form with function. However, and this is key, that some aspects of that association are not arbitrary. There is something that seems to be natural at a fundamental level to how we conceptualize sentences. In other words, there are patterns that we see in language after language, every language, that are universal. So let's take a sentence. The dog chased the bunny. Now we can see that there's a linear order to that, right? First we say the, then we say dog, then we say chased, then we say the, and then we say bunny, right? Now that's normal, and we're going to see that in every language. There's got to be a linear order to it. However, we also find that there's a hierarchical order. And what I mean by that is that we're going to group words together. We're going to call these nodes or phrases. So where they join together, we're going to call that grouping a phrase. So the dog is a phrase, and the bunny is a phrase. It gets grouped together, and it's not a coincidence that the that we've got occurs right in front of that noun. It could have occurred after the noun, but it's got to be close enough to it that it can be grouped together. I also want you to notice that the dog and the bunny are phrases of the same type. And part of what that means is that then they're interchangeable. We could have just as easily said, the bunny chased the dog. That would have meant something different, but it still would have been a grammatical sentence. And that's crucial, that when we're talking about syntax, it's the grammaticality that we're mostly interested in, not the meaning. I'm going to get to that a little bit more later. Now, that's not the only grouping that we're going to make. We're going to go up higher and see that the bunny forms another phrase with chased. So chased the bunny is a phrase by itself. Right? And that's also crucial, that we're going to have that hierarchy of chaining, that we're going to have phrases embedded inside of phrases until ultimately we get to the highest phrase, which we're going to call sentence. And it seems to be universal that languages have this concept of sentence. Now, how it's defined may differ from language to language, but every language seems to have this concept of the sort of basic linguistic structure of a sentence. I mentioned this earlier in passing, that syntax looks only at the form of sentences, not the meaning. Syntacticians derive the rules for how sentences are created. And when we're looking at how they're created, we're looking at words and how they can be grouped into parts of speech. And we're looking at phrases and how they can be grouped also into categories. We saw how the bunny and the dog, that they form the same sort of phrase. So in that way, they get grouped together into a phrase that we're going to call noun phrases. And we're going to have rules for how noun phrases are created and how sentences are created and how other sorts of phrases like verb phrases and preposition phrases and all these different phrases get combined, how they're created, and then how they can combine together to form larger phrases. On the other side, on the function side, we have compositional semantics. So just how, as we can look at individual words and see their meaning, we can also look at larger thoughts and look at how those individual words combine together to form more complex meanings. That's compositional semantics. That's going to look at the function or meaning of sentences. So I want you to take away from this the idea that syntax is meaningless. And I know I'm being a little bit flippant when I say it that way, but it is something I want you to internalize, that when we're looking at syntax, we're looking at structure, we're looking at how things are organized, and we don't really care about the meaning so much. We save that for another module, i.e. semantics.